I am joined today by a lovely chap, Ashish Thomas. Hello, sir. How are you?
I am doing well. So good to be on with you, Andy. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Now, there's a few obvious things to get out of the way. One of them is I was asked, "Oh, do you fancy an interview with this guy? He's involved with The Chosen." So let's just start right there before we go anywhere else. For people who don't know, who perhaps have been under a rock or something, what is The Chosen all about?
The Chosen is the beautiful story of the life of Jesus told through the perspective of those around him. Dallas Jenkins is the creator of the show and is doing such a beautiful job of telling these amazing stories in a way that feel authentic. So yeah, that's what The Chosen's all about. There's of course a lot to say about that, but very briefly, that's The Chosen.
Okay, so and then the next obvious one is why have you found yourself actually involved with this project? Because I know bits of it. I'll be honest, I deliberately haven't watched it yet because I binge watch. I want to wait till the end, and I want to then just sit and watch it every night because that's kind of what we do as a family. So I'm deliberately holding my back. It's really hard because everyone I know, oh, it's so good, it's so cool, yeah, but I want to wait for the end because I want to just sit and binge because that's what I do.
Wow. Well, everyone's got their own style. So you asked about how I got involved in
Yeah.
this. I'll say this because it's interesting how life comes full circle. So my parents were doctors to the poorest of the poor in the Himalayan mountains. And so what I remember just as a young boy at 6 and 7 years old, we would go up into the mountains. My parents would do medical clinics for people without access to medical care. And then in the evenings, they put up a white bed sheet, one of those old projectors. The hillsides would fill with people, and they would play the Jesus film. And I remember just a core memory, 6 and 7 years old, watching as my dad would then invite people into this story, and the people would just descend the hills and want to be a part of this Jesus story. And so very young, I was kind of initiated into this idea of the power of storytelling and how useful stories can be to connect people to life-giving truths. And so full circle, many years later, my teenage daughter and my wife, they were so excited about the show called The Chosen. And Andy, you say you're excited about watching it. I wasn't. I'm like, I'm a Jesus fan already. I don't need a Jesus show. But they sat me down. It was a bit of a hostage situation. They sat me down and I watched my first episode, season one, episode 8. And I remember thinking in that moment, this is a beautiful way to invite millions of people around the world into this story. I could see immediately kind of what I'd experienced as a kid in the Himalayan mountains, just being able to go, the world is going to respond to this. And so that's my initiation to The Chosen. That's my chosen story. It's how I got started.
I love how certain images or imagery can really grab a memory because you talk about that projector, the white sheet. I can hear that projector. I wasn't there. I don't need to be. I can hear the projector. I can see the folds on the sheet of what's going on up there. And it just, you don't care because you're in the moment. And there's something really, really tangible about that kind of old school today. I think it's still good technology, but anyway, that's another story. But I love the way that that can connect with people in such a way because that's what moving images does in
Yeah.
a really, really phenomenal way is it connects people and it brings them in to a story that might just be something, a distant thing for them. And then they see it suddenly moving and they're like, I'm there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we released this in India, the season 5 in India, and to hear the gasps in theaters, just as they were engaging with the story, just those moments of connection. And I would say that a lot of these stories, they're stained glass stories. You know, they're the things that people have heard about from pulpits and
Mm.
down in the basement of some church, and it's a felt board story, and you know they've heard these stories. We've heard these stories, but then to be able to see it come alive in a way that feels so real, and we're able to place ourselves in the story. So you ask, like, why the gasps? Why does it connect so deeply? And I think it's because Dallas's storytelling is to tell this from the perspective of those around Jesus. And so while, you know, we're able to place ourselves in the stories and in the lives of Simon Peter and these characters and go, that could be me. And so if Jesus had something to tell those people and their story and intersect their stories, perhaps he has something to say about my story. And so I think it's just being able to enter that story in a way that feels authentic.
Which I have seen clips, and I always think this is a really interesting approach for the narrative, because like you say, it's that stained glass thing of, well, there was Jesus and there was some crowd and some food, and all of a sudden when you start to unpick that, and well, there was 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and all of a sudden that childish assembly memory of the vicar coming in talking about, oh, there was some fish and now it starts to mean something, because when you attach it to real people, it just transforms it. And Jesus was a real man. There's historically, we know that, but there were real people around him, and often it's easy to sort of forget about those. I mean, there's the 12 disciples. Of course, we sort of know about, John, and there was that guy that was dodgy and he sold stuff and he betrayed. But all of a sudden, you assign faces and names. I have this with Lord of the Rings. I love reading the Lord of the Rings, but when I do it and I'm reading about Gandalf, I'm seeing some Ellen McKellen every single time. That's who I see as I read the book, and so on and so forth. Because when you've got a face and a voice, it brings it alive. And that's what I have enjoyed about the approach of The Chosen. It's coming from that slightly different perspective that most people wouldn't do, but brings it alive with so much color.
Yeah, and Dallas, he always he writes a story and he thinks about the one. So millions of people watch the show, but he's always thinking about the one. And so to give you an example, and you can check this out on YouTube, maybe look at the behind the scenes of how the Simon Peter walking on water, and just the way that story was told. That's a perfect example of an iconic story. And it's almost like in just in our language, we talk about walking on water, and yet to see the way Dallas connected that iconic story to a personal story of Simon's own disappointment with Jesus as he was stepping out on the water, something that was going, I'm not going to spoil it for anyone that hasn't watched the show, but what's going on in his own kind of personal life and his marriage through that. We can all place ourselves in that moment. So while we may never walk on water, and maybe the scene on is too iconic for us, we can connect with the emotions that are involved in that story and the way Dallas tells that story. So check that scene out. It is incredible.
But that thing of the one, that thing of the emotion, for me personally, I mean, we've set up a radio station, we've got a magazine, and I've always said to people, don't try and reach the listeners. Reach one listener, reach one reader, because we only need to connect with one other person to make the world a better place. I don't mean this in sort of wishy-washy nonsense. I mean, literally, if we can connect with somebody, then all of a sudden everything gets a little bit better. And we do that with the radio, we do that with a magazine, because one person matters. One person matters to Jesus, and one person should matter to us. So I don't really care how many listeners we have. I care that one person has been uplifted. I care that one person has been encouraged, and that's the kind of heart I give to my readers and to my writers and my presenters, because we matter, right? And people matter, but that only really becomes real when we do something, and that's something that Jesus and the disciples did, and that's definitely what The Chosen, the clips I have seen, is definitely showing.
Yeah, and it's so beautiful, because that is who Jesus was. And The Chosen tells this story beautifully, where the crowds pressed against him, and there was a woman who had the issue of blood, and she reached out and she touched his cloak, and that's an iconic story, stained glass story. But Jesus turns around and he interacts with her just as an individual in that moment. And so Jesus brought people into the story. The Chosen's bringing people into the story in a way that's authentic and personal and full of empathy. So when you think about the one, you get to be empathetic of the one. And so I think that's why it connects with people so deeply.
I want to move on to life and faith, because that's the sort of stuff I do. But
Sure.
I've been asked to show you this, so I will. This was, when was it? This was August last year. There's the camera. So this was when we did. So that's obviously off The Chosen. So that was our August mag. And it was funny. This one, we have none left. This is my library copy, which is in a drawer behind my desk. We don't have no others. No, they went. Every time I say, I'm chatting to someone about The Chosen, how do you get to speak to these people? And I think there is this excitement about it, because Is it perfectly correct? Well, of course it isn't, because we don't know everything, but it's doing a very good job. And when I speak to folk, or they speak to me about it, wow, it's so good, and it's really helping me to have conversations. And I'd never thought about this particular perspective of this much loved story, whichever it may be. And all of a sudden, people are connecting with the Bible in a way that they wouldn't have done before. And in a sense, we do have the Chosen to thank for that, because it's picturizing, terrible word, some of the things that we think of. It's that stained glass again. There was a stained glass window in a church I was at, and I used to watch it. I can't tell you what it was like now, but I used to be amazed by it. But that's a single image. That's a snapshot.
Yeah.
The Chosen is taking the snapshot and drawing it out, which is something which it has to be said, well done, because it's doing such a good job of opening much loved stories to a much wider audience in a really, really quantifiable way.
Yes, and I think Dallas and the team do such a good job as you described it. I think the theme of being able to take these iconic stories and make them personal, and now allowing people to enter into the story is so powerful. So you held up the magazine of Sahar on the cover. He's a beautiful man, if I may say so. I have no that's why those magazines went away so quickly. He's an amazing. He plays the character so well. But his character, we see the character of Peter in the biblical stories, and we know he's kind of an interesting character. But to really invest in the story, as Dallas and the team have done, and for us to then be recipients of that investment, is it adds to the understanding of the biblical narrative. It's faithful to the biblical narrative, but these stories help us understand these stories in a way that's so much deeper. And I think that's why, as someone who's preached these stories, John 4 is a great example. I've preached John chapter 4 so many times. I love that story. But that to me is one of the most iconic stories of Chosen shows. It's in season 1, episode 8. It's the first episode I watched. And when I see the woman run back to her village with that expression on her face, and she's just kind of dancing her way back to the village. It is just such a beautiful expression of that story, and I get to enter it. And I think that's what I love so much about Chosen.
Let's change tack slightly, because you're talking about faith and preaching. Obviously, The Chosen is about the life of Jesus and the people around him. So we're talking about something 2,000 years ago. When did something that happened 2,000 years ago and beyond, when did that enter your world as something very tangible? You've obviously spoken about your parents, who clearly will have had an impact, obviously. But where did faith get personalized for you?
Oh, it was for me just right around college, and for me it was my mom's diagnosis with cancer. Now my mom is I mean, I would say she's a saint, and she was such a beautiful person, and she gave her life to bring medical care to the poorest of the poor. And then to see her go through cancer was a real moment of me having to ask the most deepest questions. And I remember the day after she passed, I woke up the next morning, and faith felt binary for me on that day. I could go, I remember sitting there thinking, I could either follow Jesus or not. It felt like I had to make a choice on that day, the day after she passed, and we were heading into funeral services. And I just remember thinking, I have a choice to make here. And to me, that's the space, that wrestling of seeing how my mother leaned on her faith as she went through her toughest days and asked the toughest question. She asked herself, and I read her journal entries. She asked, why did cancer happen to me? I gave my life to serving the poor and being called into medical missionary work. Why did I end up like this? And to watch her lean on her faith as things got hard and things got opaque, and life came to its most challenging peak, was what changed me, and it caused me to connect with this story so deeply. So that's my faith journey. Grew up with all these stories, heard my dad preach it a million times, but it became real for me in that crucible of my mom's cancer diagnosis.
I'm so sorry for your loss, and I'm amazed at how you're honest about it, because people wouldn't necessarily be so. But asking those questions, and it's interesting you say about binary, because one of my privileges is asking people about their story. And there's so often, not always, but there's so often a clarity of a moment when, well, I can go this way or I can choose that way. And God, in his graceful beauty, gives us the choice. Your mum was asking the same question. Why? Why? And that why then has to lead to a what. Well, why me? Okay, but what am I going to do about that response? What if the answer is something I don't want to have? But we ask the question because we want to know. And I think all of us say, well, I'm really glad that you chose to continue towards God, but I will know, having not met you before today, it's not easy when you make that decision to say, okay, but why? Okay, but I'm going to go. What was life for you when you decided to say, okay, I'm going to make the choice to go continually back towards God? What was life like for you at that moment?
Yeah, it was really the choice that I made that day is a choice I make continually. It's not a done and dusted thing, is what I've learned about faith. So one of the things I started as a practice on that day is I start every day by journaling and I write down the number of days I've been alive.
Wow.
And so that's something I do. And even today I woke up and I wrote down the number of days I've been alive. And it's every day it's a personal liturgy for me to go, today's a day of faith. And today's a day where I have to, it's I don't get expertise in faith, if you will. I didn't graduate to a higher level of now I know all the whys. I still lean into those precious places. And as years have gone by and we went through heart surgery with our daughter and uh, the adoption process and different challenges that have come up, and you still feel like it's the same faith. You get to go back to that place of I got to follow the spirit and the conviction. And so I'm just glad to say I didn't graduate to a higher level of faith. It's the same question. It's the same liturgy. It's the same prayer. It's the same waking up each morning and saying, Lord, I want to win this day.
I think for me, I made a decision at 7 to follow Jesus, and for 42 years now, nearly, I've often asked why. There are parts of my life where I just think, but why? I understand your mum's question, but why, God, did you take me through that part of my life, which I still struggle with today? It's still a stumbling block. I have to forgive somebody for what they did to me, and you still have to go through that. But the older I get, the more I ask more deeply, yes, but why? Because I'm never satisfied with the answer. And one very wise, lovely man said, never stop asking why. Because the why engages you back to God. When everything in you wants to push yourself away, that why draws you right back to God to say, yeah, but why? Because we know that He has the answer to the difficulties in our life, which we may not understand while we're alive on this earth, but the fact we want to ask that question why, and I'm nearly 50 now, and I ask that why more passionately and more deeply and more without words of but why? But that does lead me back to God each time.
Yeah, and Andy, you stated that so well. There's a such a powerful scene in The Chosen where little James, um, he goes to Jesus and he asks him, "Why haven't I been healed?" Now he's watching the others being healed, and he goes, "Why don't I get to be healed?" I'm not going to spoil it. You've got to go see it, and your listeners got to go see it. But it is such a real conversation, and I think we can gloss over these things quickly and kind of quote a Bible verse at someone, and but when we go through the real things, the permission, the freedom, the invitation, even to ask that why, and to have a conversation with God about it, is such a beautiful thing. And yeah, check out that scene. If you've got why questions, check out that scene. It's so powerful.
I want to go back a bit further, because you talked about that moment when your mum sadly passed away, and you had that moment of, am I going to follow God or am I not? Were you following God prior to that? What was childhood for you? Obviously, you were in the Himalayas with your parents at some point, and they're showing these films because you talked about that. But what was that? What was that journey and experience? How did you feel finding yourself in that scenario as they were ministering to the poorest of the poor, and then obviously sharing Jesus? What was that whole part of your life like?
I would say, I would say my faith journey felt before that would have felt inevitable. I'd be like, "Ugh, I'm gonna end up in heaven. I'm a Christian. You know, it feels automatic. And I think and so growing up in a Christian home, in a missionary home, I'd say if you had asked me age 15, 16, are you gonna be a Christian? But yeah, I guess so. Um, but that was the moment of choice. And so I think that would be the big difference is that where it felt automatic, today it feels intentional. Today it feels like a choice that I've made and a daily choice that I make.
When you look back to those times, I'll come back to that machine with the white sheet, because it captivates me, because I have memories of not that moment, but that machine and that sheet somewhere else. What was that like as a child watching, or a teenager watching what your parents were doing? Did you understand why they were doing it, or was it more that you were just there and you were a child? How engaged were you really with what they were actually doing day to day?
I was always, and this is 6 and 7 years old, I was always just so moved by the high levels of conviction that my parents had about their calling. They just deeply knew what they were called to do. They deeply knew the purpose of why God had placed them where he had, and why they chose not to, follow the Indian dream and go west and become a doctor, and kind of that normal story, why they made the choices. And I was always moved by their level of conviction for the calling. And so it was not abnormal for me to see that then play out. This is why then they would spend, after a full week in the mission hospital, and my dad would do like 8 major surgeries a day, and then just do a few minor surgeries just thrown in, and then go out to the village church and preach, and then come back. But why would they on a weekend then fill our car up with our little old Land Rover up with all the medical supplies and drive up into the mountains? It's because they were so deeply convicted of their calling. I would also say this, that while I deeply respected that inherently, I think I saw such a gap between me and them. Like I just didn't know if I would ever measure up to that level of conviction and calling. And so maybe the reason why my faith felt automatic and is that I was like, well, if that's what convictional faith looks like, I'm just me. Like, and I think I grew up my teenage years admiring that, but distancing myself from the personal
Mm.
choice that admiration may have to cause.
But eventually led to you saying, "Do you know, I'm going to follow you, Jesus." And I understand some of the pain of that to a degree, of your mum then saying, "But why me?" Because I struggle with heart issues. And I just think, but God, if I didn't have these heart issues, or the issues with my leg in the last few months, I could do so much more, and I could run further. I could be much more healthy and fit. I would go up a flight of stairs without being breathless. But one of the things, and maybe this is maturity, I feel like an adult at last, perhaps, the fact I can't means I have to go back to Jesus. The fact that I'm unable to walk like I've done my entire life because of a heart medication that stops my heart beating, which is a good thing in bad ways. It means I have to draw more on Jesus. And it frustrates me, and it's hard, and it's hurting, and it's painful. But you know what? It means I have to rely upon Jesus more. Why am I going to share this story? I don't know. Some friends of ours, we had a very similar path for a while. We lived in a caravan. It's the biggest one you can pull legally on the roads behind a car in the UK. And we lived in that for about 6 months because we felt God calling us to having a shop, which we eventually did. And this was part of our life. Some friends of ours lived in a motorhome. Very similar kind of idea of where does God want us to land? And so we were living these separate, similar lives. And then they got to a point where someone offered them some money to buy a mortgage for a house, which they didn't have. So they got half the mortgage paid for. And then they had this house. And I remember the conversation so vividly of, it's lovely what God has done, but we miss that have to rely upon God. Because now we've got a house and it's great and God's done amazing things, but in the motorhome, or the caravan for us, there's a place of we have to rely upon God. And now that part of having to has gone. It's almost like something's missing. And I don't know why I share that, but I think it's perhaps relevant in our conversation, because when some things change or disappear, either we get frustrated, and I know you would have missed your mum, you've said that enough, but also it pulls you back to God, and it makes you want to know God more.
Yes, absolutely. And Andy, can I just say, you are little James. I mean, you have that conversation you just had is such a without even knowing it, you pretty much said the script of the conversation that Jonathan who plays Jesus and little James had. And Jonathan Ross, who plays little James, talks a lot about his own disability and walking through I'm sorry, his name is Jordan, but walking through his own disability and just playing that character. Check it out. You literally repeated the script in a way that was so real. So you've got to check out that scene.
I'm going to have to now. Let's
Yes.
move on a little bit because you're working with The Chosen. You're one of the phenomenal team, and it's huge. I think most people are always shocked if you watch even something as simple as Clarkson's Farm, which is on Prime now with Gemma Clarkson, and ever so often the 3 or 4 characters are joined by the film crew of this little TV show, and there's like 40 people appear, and you think, well, what are they all doing? Quite a lot of work, actually. They would not be there if they weren't needed. Where did the projected art, where did that become a thing for you? Was that a long time passion? Did you sort of fall into it and think, oh, this is cool? How did you find yourself wanting to be involved with any sort of movie like stuff going on?
Well, to the first part of what you just said, there's an army of people that work on the production of it, and they are so brilliant at what they do. The team that Dallas has put together, from casting to every so often we'll get to go on set and just take a tour and just be amazed at all of the various skills and talents represented there. And it's an army of people. And then there's an army of people that are working on the distribution of it and making sure that it gets to theaters and screens. And then there's an army of people that I'm the team that I'm a part of that gets to market the show and get the word out. And so, yes, there's many people involved in this. My introduction, so it was my teenage daughter and my wife that really started to hey, you got to watch this show. You got to watch this show about Jesus. And I remember saying, I'm a Jesus fan already. Like I don't need a show to. But they sat me down. It was a bit of a hostage situation. They sat me down and I watched my first episode, season 1, episode 8. And I remember thinking kind of that same thing of what I experienced as a child of my dad inviting people into the story of just being like, this could invite millions of people into the story of Jesus. So that's where it started. But then I just finished my PhD, did my PhD in behavioral economics, so studying why people behave the way that they do and transact in economics the way that they do. And then my university asked me to do a doctorate by applying what I'd learned into real brands and real life situations. And The Chosen was one of the brands I studied because I saw The Chosen telling this universal story in a way that was contextual. And so I went on set and interviewed and got to learn about what was happening. And that was where it got started for me. And I just, I'm so grateful for the people I get to work with and what we get to do in taking this story out to people.
It is an enormous story, but it's not, because it's the most personal story that can possibly exist. And trying to take that really individual story of one man that affected the entire globe is really hard. And that's where what The Chosen is doing is really impressive, because like you say, it's those stained glass, it's those images that are then made into moving form that really helps us connect with the people around Jesus. But why do you want to continue to do this? I know how you got into it. You studied it and it became something that you studied, but okay, but where was the moment of, I want to carry on doing what I'm doing?
It's the stories I get to hear. That's what energizes me. It's always about the one. I'll tell you a story of a young lady. I won't tell you the country because it's a hard country to be a Christian in. But we launched in that country, and just started putting some things on social. She got in touch with us and she said, "I'm going to call her Janet, just to give her a name." She got in touch with us and she said, I saw clips of the show on social. I want you to know I'm not a follower of Jesus. Don't try to make me a follower of Jesus, but I love your show." And so we just said, great. And that's what we always do. It's like, just let people watch the show, just let them experience it. She said, keep watching. And she got in touch with us a couple weeks later She said, I'm not a follower of Jesus. Don't try to make me a follower of Jesus. But I'm falling in love with this Jesus. How can I know more? And we said, well,
Wow.
I think the best way to do that is to read a story from the book. We recommended the book of John. And so she began to read her a Bible, the first Bible she ever bought, and she began to read that story. I know you know where the story is going, but a few weeks later, she got back in touch with us and she said, "I love this story. How can I know more?" We connected her to a church, and she went, and then cut the long story short. She sent us a picture of her coming out of the baptism tank. She shared her faith with her
Wow.
sister. Her sister came to the Lord, but, and to me, this is the highlight of the story, is that her father, who was on his deathbed, and now she's carrying this story. She's now a part of this story, and she gets to share this story with her father on his deathbed. And just to see, when you hear a story like that, that can keep you going for days and months and years. And my involvement in this is, I love the story that Dallas is telling. I love the team that is 5 and 2 Studios, and I love the opportunity to take this and impact lives. It's always about the one, impact people like Janet.
I've only just clocked 5 and 2 Studios, the relevance of the name. It's only just hit me. I'm assuming, therefore, 5 loaves and 2 fishes. It's funny. I've seen that quite a few times because we work in different contexts and stuff, and I've only just heard it.
It's
That's
it's
quite powerful.
it's actually the theme of it is, Dallas had an interaction with someone kind of at a low point, and he talks about this. It's on a live stream, but someone sent him just a sense of, as he was praying for Dallas, that this word that we're not responsible for feeding the thousands. We really bring our 5 and our 2, and it's really the culture of everything we do as a team. Is we know that the task is massive and there's millions of people entering into the story, but we really have to bring just our 5 and our 2, which is our best. And so
Yeah.
it's the name of our studio, but it's very much the culture of how we function as well.
One thing I do want to go and touch back on that you've said, you talked about your daughter and adoption. You talked about heart surgery, which is kind of personal. I've had heart surgery, which was not much fun. What? Just give us some more of the story, because I would not be doing my job if I didn't say, tell us more about that.
Okay, sure. Her name is Asha, which means hope in Hindi.
Oh,
And Asha was born on the Nepali border. She came to us when she was 4 months old. She is the most beautiful, creative, incredible person. And Asha, when she came to us, she had congenital heart disease and needed surgery, and was very she was malnutritioned, and just was not able to keep the food. She just wasn't able to digest anything because she was laboring so hard to breathe, and had to go through surgery at 6 months old. And one of you always have these moments in your life where you can transport yourself back to that moment. But I'll never forget being in the hospital post-op, just getting to know my daughter as she was laid out in this cast, because they had to separate her hands so she couldn't touch herself. As she was laid out, and I was carrying her on a pillow because she was in so much pain, pediatrics, so couldn't give her pain medication. And she was just crying, and I was crying, and we were just trying to get through the night. And sometimes I think there's so much power in just getting through the night. And so Asha and I, we really, that was a bonding moment for us. Praise be to God. I'm so grateful that she is now well. She is energetic and active, and is just the smartest, and just the most joyful beacon of light in our lives. She's 11 years old now. So yeah, that's Asha's story.
it is amazing how God can take those hard times, and they're never. I don't understand what redemption. I know what the word redemption means. I don't know what redemption means in real life. Even though I've seen it, I've felt it, I've witnessed it firsthand and third hand. I still don't know how, which is part of the mystery who God is, how he does the stuff he does. I was hearing a story just today about a guy who was on drugs and drink and now isn't. And it's like, how did God use all that for what you're doing now? And it's perfect. But the difficulty you went through with your daughter and that terrible struggle with her body not being able to cope with stuff because of the heart and all this stuff then works against each other and itself. The issues you've had with when you lost your mum of like, where am I going? Am I going to go towards God? Am I going to walk away? And that inevitability of faith, which I think many people would identify with because not everybody has that bright light in the sky moment like Paul on the road to Damascus, which is my wife's experience. Mine is the opposite. I was in a church, it just made sense. And I understand that. So I can understand both. But of all the moments in your life, you've been through so much difficulty, and we've all got our own story, and that's part of your story. And I'm sure there's more as well. Now you're working with the chosen. You look back, and I can see how God's used some of those parts of your life that have influenced you. Now, that old-fashioned movie projector on a white screen in the Himalayas and The Chosen. Okay, it's a fancier projector probably, but it's the same basic point. The question you had when your mum had passed away, and then the next day I'm thinking, well, where do I go? With the daughter and the heart disease, it's so hard. I had a child rushed into hospital because he had a really serious issue with a ruptured part of his stomach or around his stomach. And these parts, they define us in the moment. But yours has defined you. But I loved looking at your life and seeing how, but it makes sense what you're doing, right? Because people matter, because that one daughter, she mattered, that mum, she mattered. And the one that you talk about, that's also your life, which drives what you're doing now. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And I think it's the why question. When Dallas talks about we're about to release the crucifixion, which is, by the way, when you talk about stained glass stories, right, or iconic stories and symbols you see everywhere. Of course, the cross is ubiquitous in culture. It's everywhere. And the way Dallas describes it is he's telling the why of the cross. We've seen the what and how. The Passion of the Christ came out 20 something years ago, and it beautifully too. I think the extent that Mel could describe the how of the crucifixion, but I think we yearn to know why. And 2,000 years later, we still do, because we ask those questions for ourselves. Why did I go through this? Why do I exist? And to be able to look at that iconic moment of the cross, see ourselves in the story, and to understand the why. I'm not going to do any spoilers because I don't want to get in trouble, but it really traces the story of the crucifixion in a way that someone can step back and go, okay, this is why the cross happened. Because 2,000 years later, we're still asking why. Why did Jesus have to die? Why did this happen in my life? And so I think the connection for me with the whys that I've asked, the prayer that I prayed in the nights in the hospital, where just get through the night, Lord, just help us get through the night. And all of those things now come full circle in this moment for me as we get ready to experience this iconic moment on screen with the cross.
Try and wrap this up in some way after a phenomenal conversation, which I really thoroughly enjoyed. The Chosen is out. It's out and about. You can watch it on Prime and other places, I think, perhaps. But the point is, it's out there and you can use it and you can watch it. I know COVID do a lot of work trying to create ways for churches to engage with it. And how can you use this phenomenal resource? But you talked just now about just get through the night. As I look around the world today, I just see the night everywhere. Part of our mission, I guess, as a radio station or the magazines is how do we provide hope to people? And I often say, well, are we actually achieving anything? Are we really making a difference? And I know the answer is yes. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here and people wouldn't want to join us and help us and make it work. But I still find myself asking that why question. If people are looking right now and they're saying, well, how do I get through the night? Why would I want to get through the night? How would you respond to that?
Yeah. Well, for me, I know it's personal to the choice I made this morning to lean into my faith. And I think that's what gives me the answers to the why is in the answer that the Bible offers is the answer to the questions of why. And Andy, thank you for what you do, because you're taking these conversations, you're making it accessible to people. And at 5 and 2 at The Chosen, that's what we're trying to do as well. Is just make the story accessible to people that may not ever consider going to a church and hearing a sermon, or maybe there's a reason they don't want to do that, and good reason too. But to make it accessible, we've created something called the Chosen Encounter. And the Chosen Encounter is for people like you who haven't yet watched the full show and are kind of good, you'll catch up soon, I hope. But it's for people that have heard these iconic stories and just making it accessible to them and easy for them to connect with this. The Chosen Encounters, the format's really simple. You read the Bible text, which is on the screen. It's a few lines. Then you watch that scene and you have conversation about it. And it doesn't need to be, I mean, I've done this in churches, but I've done it in a coffee shop, in a pub, in just tables around just with people having conversation. But there's something about just talking about those iconic scenes. And so the Chosen Encounter is now a tool that's available to the church. It's really available to anyone. It's thechosentv.co.uk/encounters. You can get access to that. Please try that. I just think it would help a community, a group of people, some friends, come together and talk about these why questions. And I think people will find it very, very helpful. So invite your friends over, have a meal, and talk about these stories. I think it'll be really helpful to those asking why.
If I had to sum up this conversation, I would say sometimes the why questions can defeat us, or they feel like they're going to defeat us. Especially when the night comes and we think, where's the morning? Where's the dawn? Where's the sunrise going to come? Anytime now, God would be good. But in asking that question, why, it actually draws us through the darkness. It draws us through the night. And that's something that Chosen is doing for people of faith already. And it's helping them to understand the Bible even more richly. It's like when you go back into what's a Greek word or the Hebrew word. You don't need that to have a relationship with Jesus, but it adds color and flavor and it gets you deeper. In the same way that Chosen is drawing people deeper. I know it is because they talk to me about it and they say, wow, this is so amazing. I've not thought about that. So I'm very grateful for what you are doing as the wider team as well. I'm taking the time to talk to me today. The Chosen, I know that season 6 is coming out in November, which is exciting and interesting. Just give me a soundbite. Why should people watch The Chosen? Why should they stop right now and go and watch an episode of The Chosen?
Because 2,000 years later, we're still asking why. That's why as we find ourselves in this story, and we see that the words of Jesus have a powerful impact on the people in this story, we see that it has powerful impact on us, and it gives us hope to get through the night. It gives us a reason to make the choice that I had to make, and it helps explain to us some of the most difficult things that we're going through, and gives us the answers, not in a way that's trite, but gives us the answers that we get to wrestle through personally as well. And so, yes, I can't emphasize it more. Please check it out. Check out The Chosen Encounter. Yes, it'll be available. Season 6 will be out in November in streaming, and then the movie will be out right around Easter. The official dates will be announced soon, right around Easter next year. And I'll say this, even if you haven't watched a single clip of The Chosen or single episode of Chosen, the movie will still connect with you. That's how it's been created. So someone that's never watched a scene of The Chosen can watch the movie. So invite a friend. So I hope all of you catch up, but for sure, invite a friend who's never seen The Chosen as well to the movie.
Ashish, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. I'm getting stuff that I'm seeking from this conversation as well, but why God? And it's been really encouraging for me personally. So I'm hoping others will be even more encouraged than I was. So I'm really grateful for your time. Pray have a really good day. And thank you so much for your time today.
Of course. Thank you so much, Andy. I appreciate it.
Here at Pure 247 Radio, we've had the privilege of speaking to some amazing people with some amazing stories.
I was about 5k off the coast paddling, and I was watching this storm on the land, and it literally hit a mountain, and rather just going over the top of it, just turned and just came straight at me. You can't stay on the board in that instance, so I literally am jumping off the back of the board. I've got everything tethered down on the board, and I'm just holding on to the back of the board.
As I walked in, there was a fight going on the floor. There was a police sergeant sailing over the desk to help with restraining somebody. And the doors were clanging shut, all the big metal gates, and there were alarms going off and radios. And I felt this most enormous peace come over me because I realised that this is where God wanted me to spend my career, behind bars.
It was like a baptism of fire, and it was like the most socially deprived council wards in Britain. And then we were going into schools, and then kids were coming to the gigs, but then knocking on my door at night, and I was out there playing football to 11:30 p.m. at night, 12 o'clock, feeding kids, running youth clubs.
If you've missed an inspiring conversation and want to catch up, or you'd like to revisit a brilliant interview, you can. Our interviews are available on YouTube and podcast, so you can always catch up anytime you like. Search for Pure 247 Radio wherever you get your podcasts, or find our YouTube channel at Pure 247 Radio, or head over to www.pure247radio.org/catch up.